Top Texas officials say they will not comply with the deadline to allow federal border agents access to a park along the Rio Grande.
So the tension between the state and the federal government has led to some calls for the president to take control of the Texas National Guard.
Federal agents, the federal government had demanded that its agents get access to that park, that it's been a high crossing area by tomorrow. It is a small area on a big border, but it's a symbol of this dispute between the state and the feds that is ramping up. The state of Texas is adding more razor wire along the border even after a U.S. Supreme Court ruling paved the way for the feds to take it down. And Governor Abbott shared Thursday why he thinks there's constitutional backing for the state to do what it needs.
So it was the states that created the United States, and when the states voted to create the United States and have a constitution, included in that agreement was the compact that the federal government would take care of the states.
The Supreme Court ruling allows for federal agents to cut the razor wire, but there's been no decision yet on the case as a whole.
Regardless of what federal statute may exist, the supremacy clause means that the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution itself provides Texas with a right of self-defense in this case, because the United States has abandoned its responsibility to defend Texas.
Meanwhile, federal officials demanded the state of Texas allow access to Shelby Park, a high crossing area the state took over earlier this month. Attorney General Ken Paxton told Fox News the state does not plan to comply with a Friday deadline to grant access.
We're talking about 2.5 miles of a 1,260-something mile border along Texas, and suddenly they've got to have access right here.
With the state and feds at odds along the border, some have called on President Biden to federalize the Texas National Guard. White House officials addressed the matter aboard Air Force One Thursday.
Is the administration considering federalizing the Texas National Guard?
About this the other day. I don't have any decisions with respect to that to speak to for the president. No, I don't have anything on that.
Yeah, Joaquin Castro, a Democrat from Texas, your colleague, says Governor Greg Abbott is using the Texas National Guard to obstruct and create chaos at the border. If Abbott is defying yesterday's Supreme Court ruling, the President of the United States needs to establish sole federal control of the Texas National Guard now. Do you see that happening? Is President Biden about to take control of the Texas National Guard? There is a historic precedent for that under President Eisenhower. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, he better not. You know, he may be a fool, but I hope he's not an idiot. You know, if we go down that route, this is going to talk about lighting a match to a very already delicate situation. You know, I've been pushing, you know, how many Americans have to die before this Biden border crisis comes to an end? Not to mention the number of migrants that are drowning every single week. You know, this crisis has been going on for 3 years, and we have had enough.
It sounds like he's pitching it to.
I mean, look, the National Guard's not a toy, right? These state governors thinking about sending their guard troops down to the border. There's a significant cost. There's risk. Remember what happened the last time? Some of these guardsmen got injured in this deployment. I think that if Texas continues to buck the courts, which they seem to be doing, they're going to need to be treated differently, and their guard will need to be nationalized. I don't know about the rest of the National Guards around this country, and I'm hoping that the governors ignore former President Trump's statement that he made from a courtroom where he is being charged with defamation. I hope they ignore that, and they just go about their business and do what's right for their state and stay out of this.
I would just say there is a precedent for federalizing troops. We did it so that we could get children into segregated schools. We've done it before to make sure that to quell unrest. There is a precedent for this.
Let's talk about this trucker convoy. You brought this up just a moment ago. So this is called Take Our Border Back. It kicks off Monday. So you've got multiple starts. You've got trucks leaving from Virginia Beach that are going to go through Texas, Arizona, California. On the website, it describes the event as a peaceful assembly, encouraging all freedom-loving and law-abiding Americans to attend. I saw that you posted on X to raise awareness about that. You obviously just mentioned it a moment ago. I understand that you're going to be speaking once they get to Eagle Pass. I also see that it's going to go through Yuma. It's going to go San Ysidro, California as well. 700,000 vehicles. That's the prediction here. How do you keep that, well, peaceful and on track? That's a lot of trucks.
Well, the people that have organized this are the same people that went from California to D.C. with the truckers. I understand we're going to be joined by Canadian truckers. So these people are committed to a peaceful demonstration that we've had enough. The American people have had enough. We're demanding that the Biden administration do its job, enforce the laws on the books, and secure our border. 8 million people during the Biden administration. That's more than the population of Ohio.
As this border standoff ramps up, now you've got this growing list of Republican governors across the country who are standing by the Texas governor Abbott, who has put razor wire on his border to preserve and protect his own state.
And very quickly, this massive resistance, it sounds like the old Southerners who said that we will resist integration by any means necessary, that Chip Roy language.
Sure.
A group of aldermen has penned a letter to Mayor Johnson calling on him to cancel the policy that evicts migrants from shelters after 60 days. More than 15 members of council are on the letter. It says in simplest terms, quote, the city should not be in the business of handing out eviction notices. It points to the failure of the city to find alternative housing options. The aldermen calling for improved shelter conditions and medical care for all unhoused people in the city, new housing options, and the appointment of a chief homelessness officer.
Oh, Venezuela? We come back here, sir. No podemos volver, nos van a matar. ¿Qué pasó? No podemos regresar ni siquiera. ¿No? ¿Cuánto tiempo ya tienen allí? Ya casi 2 días. ¿2 días?
Are you filming this?
No hemos comido nada. Caminamos de un lado hacia abajo hasta acá, nos podemos pasar. No nos escuchan.
A group of aldermen has penned a letter to Mayor Johnson calling on him to cancel the policy that evicts migrants from shelters after 60 days. More than 15 members of council are on the letter. It says in simplest terms, quote, the city should not be in the business of handing out eviction notices. It points to the failure of the city to find alternative housing options. The aldermen calling for improved shelter conditions and medical care for all unhoused people in the city, new housing options, and the appointment of a chief homelessness officer.
Many are reporting an increase of people crowding in medians, using squeegees on cars and selling flowers or other panhandling around the metro.
So in Chicago, illegal immigrants get laundry services, mental health screenings, housing subsidies, and a government ID.
Chicago resident Kata Truss is one Democrat who teamed up with her neighbors, joined others to sue the city over plans to turn a community center into a migrant shelter.
5 a.m. in Terminal E at Logan Airport. Dozens of migrant families from Haiti and South America are asleep on the floor, including small children. This man is named Demonstri. He says his dream has been to live in Boston. He's been living at Logan for about 16 days, looking for permanent shelter. The migrant crisis has been visible at Logan Airport for months. Back in November, Massport interim CEO Ed Freni said this.
We have to emphasize that Logan is not an appropriate place for to house people.
Still, that is exactly what is happening. This is Axel. He says he's been here with his wife and 2 children for about 9 days. He tells us, we came here to look for a better life, but we didn't come here to live like an animal. The migrants tell us they are able to go to a shelter some days, but there's no space for them to spend the night in emergency shelters, so they are sent back to the airport.
A change in strategy from Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson for dealing with the steady arrival of migrants into the city. A closed-door meeting held today between his office and 24 suburban leaders. Part of Johnson's plan includes more reliance on state and federal resources. No new shelter beds will be provided. Instead, beds will be filled as migrants exit, which will put more pressure on asylum seekers to find permanent housing faster.
More equipment, including cots, is being dropped off at this Loop migrant shelter. When the shuttered Standard Club opened as a shelter last spring, it housed over 760 new arrivals. Today, there are over 1,200. When the Gage Park Field House was converted into a shelter, residents were told it could hold as many as 250 people. Today, it houses almost 400.
That shelter is bursting at the seams. We have the 2 original sides of the field house that were designated for men and women, and then we had to open up additional space in the basement and in the cafeteria area to put more beds in.
The city's largest shelter at a Pilsen warehouse was originally planned to house 1,000 new arrivals. It now holds 2,500.
Would you allow these cities to ignore the federal law regarding the reporting of illegal immigrants and, in fact, provide sanctuary to these immigrants?
The reason the cities ignore the federal law is the fact that there is no funding at the federal level to provide for the kind of enforcement at the federal level you need. Pick up the New York Times today. There's a city not far across the river from my state that imposed similar sanctions. And what they found out is, as a consequence of that, their city went in the dumps, in the dumpster. Stores started closing. Everything started to happen. And they changed the policy. Part of the problem is you have to have a federal government that can enforce laws. This administration has been fundamentally derelict in not funding any of the requirements that are needed even to enforce the existing law.
So, Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
Okay.
When do we become the sugar daddy of the world? We got to pay for everything.